You're in a basement. Not a finished basement. Not the kind with carpet and a television and a couch where people watch football on Sundays. A real basement, concrete walls that sweat in the summer. A single bulb on a pull cord. The smell of old pipes and damp earth and something else. Tension, maybe. The specific electricity of people who are afraid and have decided to act anyway. There are 7 people in this room. A former school teacher, a doctor who hasn't practiced in 2 years because her license was revoked for political reasons. Nobody bothered to disguise carefully. A kid who can't be older than 19, hoodie up, eyes moving to the door every 30 seconds. A woman in her 60s who reminds you of someone's grandmother and has, you will later discover, crossed more borders under more dangerous circumstances than anyone else in the room. And you, 3 weeks ago, you were living a normal life, or what passed for one. You went to work, you came home, you watched the news with a creeping unease you managed by not watching too much of it. You told yourself that things weren't that bad, that institutions held, that someone somewhere was handling it. Then something happened that you couldn't rationalize away. And here you are, in a basement, about to make a decision you cannot unmake. The school teacher looks around the room and says quietly, "We need to establish ground rules, because from this point forward, what we say in this room could get us killed. Nobody leaves." Let's go back to the beginning. You didn't arrive here through ideology. That's the first thing people get wrong about resistance movements. They imagine everyone inside them as true believers, ideological warriors who've been building toward this moment their whole lives. Some are. Most aren't. Most are ordinary people who reached a specific threshold where the cost of continuing to look away exceeded the cost of acting. Your threshold was a night in November. You live in a mid-sized city, the kind of place with a decent downtown, a university, neighborhoods that have been gentrifying for 20 years in a way that everyone talks about and nobody stops. You work in urban planning for the city government. You have an apartment, a cat, a group of friends you see irregularly, a relationship that ended 8 months ago for reasons that felt significant at the time and feel trivial now. The government changed 3 years ago, not through revolution, through an election. Then another election that most independent observers called compromised. Then a series of emergency measures that were meant to be temporary and became permanent in the quiet way that temporary things do when the people implementing them prefer permanence. The press isn't free anymore. Not officially banned. That would be too obvious, too easy to oppose. Just made progressively more difficult through licensing requirements and regulatory pressures and the occasional arrest of a journalist. Certain categories of people have lost protections. Incrementally, each increment explained as reasonable, as necessary, as temporary. You watched all of this happen. You told yourself the story that educated, reasonable people in comfortable circumstances tend to tell themselves that the institutions would hold, that the courts would intervene, that this was a country with deep democratic roots and those roots would reassert themselves. Then they came for your colleague, Maya, 38 years old, urban planner like you. She'd been compiling data on voter district manipulation, not secretly as part of her professional work using public records. She was arrested on a Tuesday morning. You spent 3 days waiting for someone to do something, for the story to break widely, for there to be consequences. Nothing happened. Maya stayed in detention. Your department head sent an email advising everyone to focus on their assigned work and avoid commentary on personnel matters. You sat at your desk on the fourth day and understood with a clarity that felt like cold water that you had been waiting for other people to handle something that other people were not going to handle. You started asking careful questions, and someone pointed you toward a name, and that name eventually pointed you toward a basement. The group is called, among themselves, simply the Network. No dramatic name, no manifesto with a title. The absence of mythology is deliberate. Mythology creates identity. Identity creates exposure. Exposure creates arrest. There are 7 of you in the cell. You learn gradually the protocols. You never meet as a full group except when absolutely necessary. You communicate through a system of dead drops and encrypted messages and a code built around ordinary language that would mean nothing to anyone intercepting it. You use no names outside the basement. Everyone has a designation, a number-letter combination that feels faintly absurd. Until the school teacher, whose name you will eventually learn is Francis, explains that 3 cells in the eastern part of the country were dismantled last year because someone used a real name in a message. You never use your phone in proximity to meetings. You leave it at home or in your car. The 19-year-old, whose designation is R4 and who you'll spend months knowing as nothing else, spends the first 2 meetings explaining digital security with the focused intensity of someone teaching people to defuse bombs. He's not wrong about the stakes. Your initial role is information. You work inside city government. You have access to planning databases, infrastructure records, personnel files. The network doesn't ask you to steal anything. Not yet, maybe not ever. They ask you to pay attention. To notice things that the people around you have normalized. To document patterns that look like bureaucratic decisions and collectively look like something else. You start paying attention with a focus you've never applied to your work before. What you see makes you wish you'd started looking sooner. The infrastructure data tells a story. Surveillance camera installation patterns in the city concentrate heavily in specific neighborhoods. Not the ones with the highest crime rates, but the ones with the highest density of political opposition activity. Permit denials clustering around certain community organizations. Budget allocations that look like standard urban planning decisions. And read carefully, look like the systematic economic strangulation of specific communities. You document everything. You pass it through the network's dead drop system. You go to work the next morning and sit at your desk and answer your emails and attend your meetings. And you are, for the first time in your professional life, doing 2 jobs simultaneously. It is exhausting, and it is the most alive you have felt in years. 3 months in, Francis takes you to meet someone. Not through the normal cell protocols, this is different, more careful. 2 bus changes, a 20-minute walk, a building you enter through a service entrance, a room above a laundry business where a man named, in this context, Professor is waiting. Professor is 60, gray-bearded, the kind of thin that comes from discipline rather than deprivation. He was, before everything, an actual professor. Political science. He spends 3 hours with you. He teaches you the history of resistance movements with the precision of someone who has spent decades studying them, and the urgency of someone who understands that the lessons are no longer theoretical. He talks about what works and what doesn't, about the movements that succeeded and why, about the ones that failed and the specific recurring reasons they failed. infiltration by state agents, ideological fragmentation that turn members against each other. He tells you something that stays with you longer than anything else. The state has one enormous advantage over any resistance. It can afford to be patient. It has resources and time on its side. The only way to neutralize that advantage is to be more patient than they are. Movements that run on anger burn fast and bright and collapse. Movements that run on discipline can last decades. You think about that on both bus rides home. You start reading everything you can find. Carefully, nothing downloaded, nothing that leaves a digital trace, physical books borrowed and returned through channels the network has established. You are building, you realize, an entirely new education. 6 months in, the work has deepened. Your role has evolved beyond information gathering. You've become one of the cell's key logistics operators. Francis has explained to you that logistics is the circulatory system of any resistance. The dramatic actions get the attention. The logistics make them possible. Without supply chains, safe houses, communication networks, and the quiet movement of resources, everything else collapses. You organize, you coordinate. The doctor, her name outside the protocols is Amara, has established an informal medical network. People who've been detained and released often come out with injuries that they can't take to hospitals without triggering reporting requirements. Amara treats them. You handle the logistics of getting people to her safely. The grandmother, Elena, runs the Safe House Network, a series of ordinary-looking homes and apartments where people can disappear for days or weeks when the pressure gets too close. You've helped her establish 3 new locations. The owners are people who've made their own calculations about risk and decided that passivity is no longer something they can afford. Tomas has built a communication system that has kept cells operational through a period when the state's signals intelligence capability has been actively hunting for them. You are not dramatic about any of this. The goal is to be invisible. A perfectly ordinary urban planner who goes to work, comes home, lives a quiet life, and in the spaces between does things that would result in a lengthy prison sentence. You've become good at the compartmentalization, almost too good. Sometimes you sit in a department meeting and look around at your colleagues and feel the specific vertigo of living completely inside 2 realities simultaneously. 8 months in, the first real loss. R4, Tomas, is arrested on a Thursday. Not for anything connected to the network. As far as anyone can determine, it's a separate thread, a communication he had outside the protocols with someone who turned out to be less careful than he was. The effect on the cell is the same. Francis calls an emergency meeting. The protocols for this situation are clear. Everyone goes dark for 3 weeks. No contact, no meetings, no movement of anything through any channel. 3 weeks of absolute silence to determine whether what happened to Tomas is the beginning of a wider sweep or an isolated arrest. You spend those 3 weeks in a state of controlled fear that you manage with rigid routine. Work, home, cooking dinner you don't taste, reading, sleep that comes late and leaves early. You think about Tomas constantly, about what he's experiencing. On the 16th day of the silence you receive, through a channel so old-fashioned you almost miss it, a note left in a physical book returned to a used bookstore store, a message that Tomas has been charged, that a lawyer connected to the network's outer support structure is involved, that he has said nothing. You read it 3 times, fold it, and burn it over your kitchen sink. You go back to work the next morning. When the 3 weeks end and the cell reconvenes you, look around the basement and there are 6 people instead of 7. The empty space where Tomas sat is the loudest thing in the room. Level 6, the expansion. A year in, the network has grown. Not your cell specifically, that stays at 6 deliberately, but the structure above and around your cell has expanded significantly. The movement of information through your work has contributed to a documentation project that is being assembled, carefully and redundantly, against a future moment when it might be used. Evidence. Patterns, the kind of systematic record that can support accountability when accountability becomes possible again. You've been asked to take on a coordination role between 3 cells in your region. This is a promotion in the language of this world, and it comes with exactly the complications that any promotion brings. More responsibility, more exposure. The more you know, the more damage your arrest can do. You accept, your world expands. You begin to understand the scale of what's been built. Thousands of people organized in cells across the country. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, former military, people in government positions not unlike yours. People with no institutional affiliation at all, just a threshold that got crossed and a decision that got made. Keeping a coalition that wide pointed in the same direction requires an extraordinarily rare quality of leadership. You meet the woman who provides that leadership in your region. Her designation inside the network is Meridian. She is 45, calm in the way that people are calm when they've already made peace with the worst likely outcomes, and she has been doing this for 6 years. She tells you something in your first meeting that recalibrates how you think about everything. We are not trying to win. Not yet. We are trying to survive long enough for the conditions to change. Our job right now is to exist, to keep the capacity for resistance alive until the moment arrives when it can become something more. Don't mistake maintenance for failure. 14 months in, a cell in the northern part of the region is compromised. 7 arrests in a single night. The pattern of the arrests, who they took, in what order, the specific evidence cited in the charging documents that leak out through legal channels, indicates an informant. Someone inside. The effect on the wider network is immediate and profound. Not panic. The protocols were built for this, the structures hold. But a deep, pervasive recalibration of trust that changes the texture of every interaction. You look at the people in your cell and in the cells you coordinate with, and you perform a rapid, unconscious audit of everything you know about them. What they've said, what they haven't. The moments that seemed odd and got rationalized away. You hate yourself a little for doing it, you do it anyway. Meridian calls the regional coordinators together. She walks through what happened with the unemotional precision of a surgeon describing a procedure. She explains the protocol adjustments. She answers questions with patience and without minimizing anything. Then she says, infiltration is not a failure of the movement. It is a predictable tactic of any state facing organized resistance. The question is not whether it will happen. It will always happen. The question is whether our structure is resilient enough to survive it. Ours is. We continue. You watch the room as she says this. You watch people absorb it. Watch the fear get processed and converted slowly into something more useful. You understand why Meridian is what she is? Level 8, what it costs and what it means. 2 years in, you are a different person than the one who walked into a basement and made a decision that couldn't be unmade. The differences are not all noble. You are more paranoid than you used to be. Not irrationally, just functionally. You have fewer friends than you used to, partly from the operational necessity of limiting exposure, and partly because the gap between your inner life and the ordinary social life of people who haven't crossed this particular threshold has become very wide. You carry it alone, and the weight of that is real. Maya was released 6 months ago. The conditions of her release are restrictive, and she is not the person she was before. Not entirely. And you understand that what happened to her is partly the reason you're where you are, and you feel the complicated weight of that every time you see her. But children are getting education through a network the movement established. There are people who needed to disappear and did, safely. There is a documentation project containing thousands of records that will outlast whatever pressure is being applied to bury them. There is a medical network serving people who would otherwise have no care. There is a communication infrastructure that has kept hundreds of people connected through periods of severe repression. These things exist because people decided to build them in basements and back rooms and ordinary-looking apartments. You are sitting in a basement again. Different basement. More people. The single bulb has been upgraded to a proper lamp. Small victories. Francis is talking through a new project. Everyone is listening. Tamaz is gone, serving his sentence. His empty chair is still the loudest thing in every room. But there are new people, and they have the same quality you had when you walked in. The specific electricity of people who are afraid and have decided to act anyway. You look at them and you think, someone has to explain the protocols. Someone has to explain what this actually costs. Someone has to tell them that this is not romantic, not dramatic, not the movie version of resistance, that it is mostly logistics and patience and the daily decision to keep going. That someone is you now. So what does every level of an underground resistance movement actually look like? At the bottom, it looks like a threshold. A moment where the story you've been telling yourself about why things aren't that bad stops being something you can believe. In the middle, it looks like work. Unglamorous, relentless, patient work. It looks like logistics and dead drops and the disciplined management of your own fear. It looks like losing people and continuing anyway, because continuing is the whole job. At the top, it looks like responsibility. Not for yourself anymore, but for everyone below you. For the cells and the networks and the new people coming in with their fear and their electricity and their need to understand what they're actually walking into. History remembers resistance movements in the past tense. It talks about them as though the outcome was always inevitable, as though the people inside them knew they were going to win. They didn't. They made decisions in the dark with no guarantee of anything except the alternative, which was silence. Most of them were ordinary people who reached a threshold, who looked around a room and decided that the person who was going to do something about it was them. The question isn't whether you believe in the cause. The question is whether you're willing to show up in a basement without any promise of how this ends, and keep showing up every single day until it does.